Some secrets don't stay buried. They come looking for you with a loaded gun. For Eli Hart, that moment arrived on an ordinary afternoon in a dusty saloon when a stranger called him father. The young woman standing before him had his name on her lips and a revolver in her hand. She wanted answers about a past Eli didn't remember and a daughter he never knew existed. Her mother was Sarah, a woman he'd loved 20 years ago before she disappeared without explanation. Now Sarah was gone, and this girl held the only clue, a locket with a letter inside that would change everything Eli thought he knew about love, betrayal, and the choices that haunt us. What had Sarah hidden all those years, and why? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eli Hart had always been a man of the mountains. The high country suited him, silent, unforgiving, honest in its harshness. For 15 years, he'd made his home in a timber cabin tucked into a valley where the pines grew thick and the nearest neighbor was a day's ride away. He trapped in winter, hunted year-round, and came down to Clearwater 4 times a year for supplies and whiskey. It was a solitary life, but solitude had never bothered him. Truth was, he preferred it that way. The ride down from his cabin took most of a day, following old game trails that wound through stands of lodgepole pine and across meadows where elk grazed in the early morning. His horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Dusty, knew the path as well as he did. They'd made this journey together so many times that Eli barely needed to guide her. She picked her way down the rocky switchbacks with the steady confidence of experience, her hooves finding purchase on loose scree where a lesser animal might stumble. It was late September, and the aspens had turned golden. They shimmered in the afternoon light like coins scattered across the mountainside. The air carried the crisp bite of coming winter, and Eli knew he'd need to make this his last trip before the snows came. He had a list in his mind: flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, a new saw blade, if Henderson's Mercantile had one in stock. Simple needs for a simple life. He didn't think about the past much anymore. 15 years was long enough to bury most memories, and the ones that remained had worn smooth like river stones, their sharp edges dulled by time. But sometimes, riding alone through country this beautiful, his mind would drift back to a time when he'd imagined sharing it with someone. Her name had been Sarah Brennan, and she'd had hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes that held more kindness than any person he'd known before or since. They'd met at a church, social in Clearwater, when Eli was 23, and fresh back from his years as a cavalry scout. The army had hardened him, taught him to track and survive and fight, but it hadn't prepared him for the way Sarah smiled at him across a table of apple pies and cornbread. They'd courted for 6 months, walks along the creek, Sunday dinners with her parents, quiet conversations on her family's porch as the sun set behind the mountains. He'd asked her to marry him on a spring evening when the wildflowers covered the meadows like a quilt. She'd said yes without hesitation. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, she was gone. No note, no explanation, no trace. Her mother said Sarah had packed a single bag and left before dawn. Her father, a weathered rancher named Thomas Brennan, had looked 10 years older when Eli came asking questions. She said she had to go, Thomas told him, eyes red from crying or drinking or both. Said it wasn't about you, but she couldn't explain. Made me promise not to follow her. Eli had followed anyway. Spent 3 months riding from town to town, asking after a young woman traveling alone. He'd traced rumors and dead ends from Montana to Colorado and back again, but Sarah Brennan had vanished as completely as morning mist. Eventually, he'd returned to Clearwater, hollow and angry, and accepted that she'd made her choice. Whatever her reasons, she'd chosen to leave him behind. The Brennan Ranch had fallen on hard times after that. Thomas died in a logging accident within the year, crushed by a widowmaker that fell wrong. Sarah's mother, Margaret, followed him 6 months later. Some said it was pneumonia. Others whispered it was a broken heart. The land passed to Thaddeus Cole, a wealthy rancher whose holdings stretched across half the valley. Cole had been trying to buy the Brennan place for years, and with Thomas and Margaret gone, there was no one left to say no. Eli had left Clearwater after that. Spent 5 years drifting, cowhand work, some guiding, a stint as a deputy in a mining camp where the law mattered less than a fast draw. But the towns wore on him, all that noise and need and pretense. So he'd come back to Montana and built his cabin in the high country where a man could hear himself think. Now, at 38, his hair was shot through with grey at the temples, and his hands bore the scars of hard living. His face had lines that hadn't been there in his youth, carved by sun and wind and the weight of years spent alone. He was lean and strong, with the kind of endurance that comes from a life lived outdoors. People who knew him described him as quiet, reliable, and not given to unnecessary words. Those who knew him better understood that the quiet covered an old wound that had never quite healed. Clearwater hadn't changed much in 15 years. It was still a single main street lined with false front buildings, Henderson's Mercantile, the assayer's office, a blacksmith, a modest church, and the Golden Bell Saloon, where men gathered to drink and exchange news. The town served the ranchers and miners scattered through the surrounding territory, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business and strangers were noticed immediately. Eli rode in just after 3 o'clock, the sun slanting long shadows across the dusty street. He nodded to old Henderson, sweeping the porch of his store, tipped his hat to Mrs. Walsh, hanging laundry behind the boarding house. These were familiar rituals, comfortable in their predictability. He'd stable Dusty at the livery, get a room at the boarding house, take care of his business in town, and head back up the mountain in 2 days. Same as always, the Golden Bell stood at the far end of the street, its painted sign faded but still readable. Eli could use a whiskey to cut the trail dust, and he figured he'd catch up on any news worth hearing. Harvest was done, which meant the ranchers would be settling accounts, and the mood would be either celebratory or grim, depending on how the season had treated them. He tied Dusty to the hitching post and stepped up onto the boardwalk. The saloon doors swung open with their familiar creak, and Eli walked into the dimness, his eyes adjusting from bright sunlight to the amber glow of oil lamps. The smell hit him first, whiskey and tobacco and the sour tang of spilled beer. A dozen men occupied the space, some at the bar, others at tables scattered around the room. Conversations hummed like bees, and someone was playing a melancholy tune on an out-of-tune piano in the corner. Eli was 3 steps inside when every sound stopped. The piano player's hands froze mid-chord. Conversations died. Every eye in the room turned toward him, but not in greeting. There was something else in those stares, anticipation, wariness, the electric tension that comes before a storm breaks. Then he saw her. She stood near the bar, and she was young, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes that burned with an intensity that made Eli's breath catch. She wore a simple dress covered by a worn canvas jacket, and in her right hand, held steady and sure, was a Colt revolver pointed directly at his chest. "Eli Hart," she said, and her voice shook but didn't break. "They told me you'd come today." Eli raised his hands slowly, keeping them visible. His mind raced, cataloging details. The gun wasn't wavering. She knew how to hold it. "This wasn't a bluff. I'm Eli Hart," he said calmly. "But I don't know you, miss." "No," she agreed, and something like pain flashed across her face. "You don't, but you knew my mother." The room seemed to tilt. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. "Tell me," the young woman said, taking a step closer, the revolver never wavering. "Tell me true, and I'll know if you're lying." "Who is my father?" Eli met her eyes, saw the desperate need for truth in them, and felt the world he'd carefully constructed. Over 15 years begin to crack. "I don't understand what you're asking me," he said. Quietly, she reached into her jacket pocket with her free hand and pulled out something small that caught the lamplight, a tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. She held it up, let it spin slowly. "My mother's name was Sarah Brennan," she said, and Eli's heart stopped. "Before she died 3 months ago, she told me about the man she loved, the man she had to leave behind. The man whose child she carried when she disappeared. The locket swung between them like a pendulum, marking time that Eli could no longer feel. She told me his name was Eli Hart, the young woman continued, and tears began to streak down her face, though her hand remained steady. She told me he was my father. So I'm asking you one more time, who is my father? Eli stared at her, at the fierce determination in her face, at the shape of her jaw and the set of her shoulders and the way she held herself, like someone who'd learned early to be strong. And in that moment, looking at this stranger who claimed to be his daughter, Eli Hart saw Sarah Brennan's eyes staring back at him from across 20 years of silence and loss. "I don't know," he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. "God help me, I don't know." The silence in the golden bell stretched like a rope pulled taut. Eli stood frozen, hands still raised, staring at the young woman who claimed to be his daughter. The locket swung gently between them, catching lamplight with each movement. Around the room, men held their breath, waiting to see how this would unfold. Sheriff Wade Morrison stepped forward from where he'd been sitting at a corner table. He was a solid man in his 50s. With iron-grey hair and the careful movements of someone who'd learned long ago that hasty actions got people killed. "Easy now, Rose," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let's all stay calm." So her name was Rose. Eli felt something twist in his chest. Sarah had loved roses. She'd talked about planting them around the house they'd never built together, filling the air with their scent come summer. "I am calm," Rose said, though her jaw was clenched tight enough that Eli could see the muscle jumping. "I've been calm for 3 months while I tried to find him. I've been calm while I traveled alone from Redemption Creek to this town. I've been calm while everyone I asked about Eli Hart told me what a good man he was, how honest and decent." Her voice cracked. "So calm isn't my problem. Truth is my problem." "Put the gun down," Sheriff Morrison said gently. "Whatever needs saying can be said without that. Can it?" Rose's eyes never left Eli's face. "Because I've learned that men lie real easy when there's no consequences. But a gun makes people honest." "I'm not lying," Eli said quietly. "I truly don't know you. I didn't know Sarah was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of it was too enormous. "Pregnant?" Rose finished for him, bitter. "With child? Carrying your baby when you abandoned her?" "I never abandoned her." The words came out sharper than Eli intended. "Sarah left me. 2 weeks before our wedding, she packed a bag and disappeared. I searched for her for months. I would have—" His voice broke. "If I'd known, I would have torn the whole territory apart to find her." Rose studied his face, and Eli saw the uncertainty flicker in her eyes. Whatever she'd expected, anger, denial, indifference, she wasn't finding it. What she saw instead was a man who looked like he'd been struck by lightning, stunned and hurting and completely lost. "She left you?" Rose's gun hand lowered slightly. "That's not," she said. "What did she say?" Eli took a careful step forward. "Please, tell me what she said." Rose's hand trembled now. The gun dipped toward the floor, though she didn't holster it. "She said you were a good man, the best man she'd ever known. She said she loved you more than life itself." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "She said leaving you was the hardest thing she ever did, but she had no choice. She had to protect you. Protect me from what?" She wouldn't say. Even at the end, when the fever had her and she knew she was dying, she wouldn't tell me everything. Just that powerful men had threatened you, and the only way to keep you safe was to disappear. Rose's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "She made me promise to find you after she was gone, to tell you the truth. To give you this." She held out the locket with her free hand. Eli approached slowly, watching her for any sign of panic. When he was close enough, he took the locket carefully. It was warm from being held against her body, the silver tarnished with age, but still beautiful. His fingers found the tiny clasp, and the locket opened with a soft click. Inside was a photograph, a tintype actually, small and precious. Eli's breath caught. It showed him and Sarah together, young and smiling, his arm around her shoulders and her head leaning against his chest. He remembered the day it was taken. A traveling photographer had set up shop in Clearwater for a week, and Sarah had insisted they have their picture made. "So we'll always remember how happy we were," she'd said. Opposite the photograph was a lock of hair tied with thread, golden as wheat. Sarah's hair, and tucked behind it, folded small, was a piece of paper. Eli pulled it out with unsteady hands and unfolded it carefully. The paper was old, the creases worn thin from being opened and closed many times. The ink had faded to brown, but Sarah's handwriting was still clear. "My dearest Eli," it began. And Eli had to stop reading for a moment to steady himself. The letter was short, the words clearly written in haste. "My dearest Eli, by the time you read this, if you ever read this, years will have passed, and I pray you found happiness without me. Know that I loved you with everything I was. Know that I carry your child, a piece of you I'll treasure all my days. I cannot tell you why I must leave, only that men with power and no conscience have made staying impossible. They've threatened your life, my love, and I cannot bear to be the cause of your death. I'm told that if I leave quietly and never speak of what I know, you'll be safe. So I go. Forgive me if you can. Remember me if you will. And know that every sunrise I'll think of you and the life we should have had. Forever yours, Sarah." Eli read it 3 times before he could trust himself to speak. When he finally looked up, Rose was watching him with an expression that mixed hope and fear and desperate need. "She never stopped loving you," Rose said softly. "Even when times were hard and we had nothing, she'd take out that locket and look at your picture. She'd tell me stories about you, how you taught her to fish, how you made her laugh, how safe she felt in your arms." Her voice broke. "She told me I had your stubbornness and her temper, and that combination would either make me strong or get me killed." Despite everything, Eli felt a ghost of a smile. She was probably right about that. Rose finally lowered the gun completely, though she didn't put it away. This was hers, the revolver. "She taught me to shoot with it. Said a woman alone in this world needs to be able to protect herself." She met Eli's eyes. "She made me promise that if I ever found you, I should be sure of you before I trusted you. She said powerful men still had long reaches, and I had to be careful." "What men?" Eli's mind raced. "Who threatened her? Who took her from me? I don't know all of it. She never gave me names, just warnings." Rose hesitated, then added, "But there was one name she mentioned sometimes when she thought I was asleep. A name that made her voice go cold." "What name?" "Thaddeus Cole." The name hit Eli like a physical blow. Cole, the man who'd acquired the Brennan land after Sarah's parents died. The man who'd built his empire on the backs of smaller ranchers. The man everyone feared but no one challenged, because his reach extended to judges, lawyers, and men with guns. Around them, the saloon had come back to life in hushed murmurs. Men were leaning close to their neighbors, whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Sheriff Morrison stepped closer, his face grave. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Brennan," he said. "Thaddeus Cole is a monster," Rose finished. "I don't know all of what he did, but my mother carried that fear her whole life. She'd flinch at shadows. She'd make us move whenever strangers came to town asking questions. She lived like a hunted animal, Sheriff, and whatever Cole did to her, it was bad enough that she chose exile over risking my life or Eli's." Eli's hands clenched into fists. 20 years. Sarah had suffered for 20 years because of Thaddeus Cole, and he'd raised a daughter alone, in fear, never knowing peace. And Eli, he'd spent those same years thinking Sarah had simply chosen to leave him. "I need to see Cole," Eli said, his voice cold and flat. "I need answers." "That's not a good idea," Sheriff Morrison warned. "Cole's an old man now, sick with something the doctors can't cure. But his son Marcus runs things these days, and Marcus doesn't have his father's restraint. You go poking around out there, you might not come back. I don't care." Eli turned to Rose. "Do you have somewhere to stay? Somewhere safe?" "The boarding house. Mrs. Walsh gave me a room." "Stay there. Keep that gun close. Don't go anywhere alone." Eli's voice carried the weight of command, the tone of a man used to being obeyed in dangerous situations. Rose's chin lifted. "I'm not a child. And this is my fight too. You're right. You're not a child." Eli met her eyes, saw the steel in them, Sarah's steel tempered by hardship. "You're my daughter, And I've already lost 20 years with you because I didn't know you existed. I'm not losing you now." The words hung in the air between them. My daughter. The first time he'd said it out loud, and it felt both foreign and absolutely right. Rose's eyes widened, filling with fresh tears. "You believe me?" Just like that. Eli reached out slowly and cupped her face in his hand, the gesture tentative, asking permission. She didn't pull away. "I see your mother in every line of your face," he said softly. "I see her courage, her fire, her heart. And I see something of myself, too, though that might just be wishful thinking. But more than that, I believe you, because that letter," he gestured to the locket still in his other hand, "that letter is Sarah's heart on paper. She wouldn't lie. Not about something like this." Rose closed her eyes, leaning into his touch like someone starved for affection. "She wanted me to find you. It was her last wish. Then I'm grateful she did." Eli's thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. "And I promise you, Rose, we'll find out what happened. We'll learn the whole truth, and we'll make sure your mother's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "I'll need to come with you when you talk to Cole. This needs to be done legal." "Fine." Eli didn't take his eyes off Rose, "but it's going to be done. One way or another." Rose opened her eyes and managed a small, shaky smile. "She was right about you. You are stubborn. Wait until you get to know me better," Eli said. Stubborn doesn't begin to cover it. For the first time since walking into the Golden Bell, he felt something shift inside him, not just grief and shock, but something warmer, purpose, connection, hope. He had a daughter. After 20 years of loneliness and questions, he had a daughter. And together they were going to find out why Sarah Brennan had been forced to give up everything she loved. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat in his room at the boarding house, the oil lamp burning low on the table, and stared at the tintype photograph of himself and Sarah. Young faces, untroubled smiles, a future they'd never lived. The woman in that picture had loved him enough to sacrifice everything. The man looking back at him from the old image had no idea how much life could take from you. The letter lay open beside the photograph, Sarah's words reading like a ghost's whisper across time. He'd memorized every line, every curve of her handwriting, searching for clues he might have missed. "Men with power and no conscience. If I leave quietly and never speak of what I know." What had Sarah known? What secret had been worth destroying 3 lives over? Dawn came slowly, grey light creeping through the window. Eli rose, splashed water on his face from the basin, and dressed with the careful deliberation of a man preparing for something difficult. He strapped on his gun belt, not because he intended to use it, but because a man who went unarmed to ask hard questions was a fool. He found Rose in the boarding house dining room, sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. She looked like she'd slept about as well as he had, which was to say not at all. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same practical braid, and she wore the same worn jacket over her dress. The revolver, her mother's revolver, was visible in a holster on her hip. "Morning," Eli said, pulling out the chair across from her. Rose looked up, and something in her expression shifted when she saw him. Wariness giving way to something that might have been relief. "Morning. I wasn't sure you'd still be here. Where else would I be?" "Gone. Back to your mountain." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, as if needing its warmth. "Men say things in the moment. I thought maybe in the light of day you'd decide this was too complicated." "That I was too complicated." Eli leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd run from my own daughter? I don't know what I think of you yet." Her honesty was sharp, but not unkind. "Yesterday morning you were just a name my mother said with love and sadness. Now you're sitting across from me and you're real and I don't know how to—" She stopped, frustrated with words that wouldn't come. "I understand." Eli's voice was gentle. "This is strange for both of us. I'm 40 years old and I just found out I have a grown daughter." "You're 20 years old." 19, she corrected. 19 and you just met the father you never knew you had. "There's no map for this, Rose. We'll figure it out as we go." Mrs. Walsh brought Eli coffee and a plate of eggs and biscuits without being asked. She was a stout woman with kind eyes and the discretion of someone who'd run a boarding house for 30 years. If she had thoughts about the previous day's drama, she kept them to herself. When she'd gone, Rose said quietly, "Tell me about her." "About my mother." Before she left, Eli took a long drink of coffee, gathering memories he'd buried deep. He paused, searching for words. She was the kind of person who made everything better just by being in the room. She laughed easily, but not at people, never at people. She had this way of seeing the good in folks, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Rose's eyes were fixed on his face, hungry for details. She loved the morning best, Eli continued. She'd get up before dawn and watch the sun rise, and she said every sunrise was proof that the world was full of hope. I used to tease her about it, but the truth is, I loved that about her. After weeks of riding patrol with soldiers who'd seen too much darkness, being with Sarah was like coming home to light. She still did that, Rose said softly. Watch the sunrise every morning. Even when she was sick at the end, she'd make me help her to the window so she could see it. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people connected by a woman who'd loved them both and paid dearly for it. She taught me to read, Rose offered. We didn't have many books, but she made sure I learned. She said education was the only thing no one could take from you. That sounds like her. Eli found himself smiling, despite the ache in his chest. She used to read to her father in the evenings. Poetry, mostly. She had a beautiful voice. She sang to me, Rose said. Lullabies when I was small, hymns later. Even at the end, when talking hurt, she'd hum. Her voice caught. I miss her every minute of every day. So do I, Eli admitted. And I didn't even know I'd lost her until yesterday. I thought she'd just chosen a different life. But knowing the truth, knowing she loved me, that she was forced away, he shook his head. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Both, Rose said. It's both. After breakfast, they walked to the boarding house room where Rose was staying. It was a simple space, a bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. But on the bed sat an old leather trunk, scuffed and travel-worn. This is everything she left me, Rose said, running her hand over the trunk's curved top. Her clothes, a few personal things. I've been through it 12 times, but maybe you'll see something I missed. She opened the trunk, and the smell of lavender drifted out. Sarah had always loved lavender. Eli's throat tightened. Inside were folded dresses, a worn shawl, a small wooden box that held needles and thread and buttons. Rose lifted out each item carefully, treating them with the reverence of sacred objects. Beneath the clothes were a few books. A Bible, a collection of poetry, a volume of folk tales with a cracked spine. She read me stories from this one, Rose said, touching the folk tale book. When I was little and couldn't sleep. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of papers. Rose handed them to Eli with unsteady hands. I found these a week after she died. She'd hidden them under the false bottom of the trunk. I didn't even know the trunk had a false bottom until... Her voice broke. Until I was packing her things, and the bottom shifted. Eli unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe more. He picked up the first one, unfolded it, and felt the world tilt. My dearest Eli, it began, in Sarah's handwriting. The date was 20 years ago, just weeks after she'd left Clearwater. I write this, knowing you'll never read it, but I must write anyway or go mad with the silence. I'm in Denver now, far from you and everything I loved. The child grows inside me, your child, our child, and I feel it move and want to weep because you should be here to feel it too. Eli looked up at Rose, his vision blurred. There are more? At least 40, maybe 50. She wrote to you for months, maybe longer, but she never sent them. With trembling hands, Eli picked up another letter, and another. Each one was dated, each one addressed to him, each one full of love and longing and fear. Sarah wrote about the pregnancy, about her plans, about the tiny room she rented, and the sewing work she found. She wrote about missing him so much it hurt to breathe. And she wrote about being watched. There are men here who ask questions, one letter said. They pretend to be casual, but I see how they watch me. I move again tomorrow before they can report back to him. I won't lead them to you. I won't let him hurt you. Him, Eli said aloud. She keeps saying him, but no name. Keep reading, Rose said quietly. Eli shuffled through the letters, scanning them for names, for anything concrete. And then, near the bottom of the stack, he found it. Thaddeus Cole's reach is longer than I imagined. His man found me in Laramie, said Cole wanted to talk. I ran before he could get close. I'm heading north now, away from the territory's Cole controls. Perhaps in Montana, far from his land, I can finally disappear. Eli lowered the letter, his jaw clenched so tight, his teeth ached. He hunted her. Cole hunted her like an animal. Why? Rose demanded, her hands fisted in her lap. What did she know that was worth this? I don't know. But we're going to find out. Eli stood, gathering the letters carefully. May I keep these? I want to read them all, see if there's anything else. They're yours, Rose interrupted. She wrote them to you. They were always yours. Eli looked at his daughter, and she was his daughter, he had no doubt of that now, and saw Sarah's strength looking back at him. Your mother raised a brave woman. She raised me to survive, and to never let anyone make me small. Rose stood, her hand resting on the butt of her revolver. So what's our next move? We find out everything we can about Thaddeus Cole and why he wanted Sarah gone. And then, Eli's voice went cold and hard. Then we make him answer for what he did. Rose smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent 19 years hearing about the monster who'd destroyed her mother's life, and was finally going to face him. Good, she said simply. Let's go hunting. That evening, as Eli sat alone in his room, reading through Sarah's letters again, something caught his attention. He'd been so focused on the content, her expressions of love, her fear, her references to Cole, that he'd missed a detail that now seemed crucial. Several of the letters had been written on different paper than the others. Most were on cheap, rough paper that Sarah would have bought at a general store. But 3 letters were written on finer paper, with a watermark he could just make out when he held them to the lamp. He went to Rose's room and knocked softly. When she opened the door, he held up one of the letters. Look at this paper. It's different from the others. Rose took it, examining it closely. It's nicer quality. She must have bought it somewhere special. Or found it, Eli said. Look at the date on this letter. It was written just before she left Denver. And in it, she mentions working as a seamstress for a wealthy family. Rose read aloud. The lady of the house is kind, though troubled. She suspects her husband of dark dealings, but dares not speak against him. She pays me fairly and sometimes gives me small gifts, paper ribbons, things she says she has no use for. Now look at the watermark. Eli held the paper up to the lamp. Barely visible in the fiber was a small emblem, an eagle with spread wings. It's beautiful work, Rose said. Custom paper. Only wealthy people would have something like this. And if we can find out who made this paper, we might be able to trace it back to the family Sarah worked for. They might remember her. They might know something. Rose's eyes lit up. They might be willing to testify about what Sarah told them. The next morning, they took the letter to Henderson's mercantile. Old Henderson examined the paper with a magnifying glass, turning it this way and that in the light. This is fine paper, he said admiringly. Not the sort of thing we'd carry here. This would come from a specialty shop in a bigger city, Denver maybe, or San Francisco. The watermark suggests it's from a private commission. Someone had this paper made special for them. Can you tell us anything about the eagle design? Eli asked. Henderson squinted at it. It's distinctive. Almost looks military, that style of eagle. Could be a family crest or a business emblem. He looked up at them apologetically. I'm sorry I can't be more help. But if you're trying to trace it, you'd need to contact paper mills or stationers in the big cities. As they left the mercantile, discouraged, they nearly collided with a well-dressed man coming out of the assayer's office. He was in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone important. Eli recognized him as James Garrett, one of the few lawyers in Clearwater who wasn't in Cole's pocket. Mr. Hart, Garrett said, nodding. Then his eyes fell on Rose, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or surprise, Mr. Garrett, Eli said. This is my daughter Rose, Miss Hart, Garrett tipped his hat. "I've heard about you. The whole town's talking about Sarah Brennan's daughter coming home." His voice was warm, respectful. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. I'm sorry for your loss. You knew her?" Rose asked. "Only slightly. She worked for my sister for a time, years ago, doing needlework." He paused. "Actually, my sister lives in Denver now. Married to a man named Whitmore, Edmund Whitmore. He's a territorial judge." Eli and Rose exchanged glances. Denver, where Sarah had lived, where she'd worked for a wealthy family. "Mr. Garrett," Eli said carefully, "would your sister remember Sarah?" "I imagine so. Catherine had great respect for her." "Why do you ask?" Eli pulled out the letter written on the fine paper. "We're trying to trace where Sarah got this paper. It was given to her by someone she worked for. We think it might lead us to witnesses who could help us prove that Thaddeus Cole obtained the Brennan land through fraud." Garrett's expression grew serious. He took the paper, examined it, and then held it up to the sunlight. His face went very still. "This is Whitmore paper," he said quietly. "I'd recognize that eagle anywhere. It's Edmund's family crest. He has all his stationery custom-made in England." "So Sarah worked for your sister," Rose said, her voice trembling with excitement. "The wealthy family she mentioned in the letters. It was Catherine Whitmore." "It seems so." Garrett looked troubled. "If Sarah told Catherine anything about Cole, about what happened to her parents, Catherine would remember. She has a keen sense of justice. It's one of the reasons she married Edmund." He handed the paper back to Eli. "But I should warn you, Edmund Whitmore has political ambitions. He won't want to get involved in anything that might make enemies in the territory." "What about your sister?" Eli asked. "Would she be willing to help?" Garrett considered this. "Catherine has her own mind, always has. If she believed in your cause, Edmund's political concerns wouldn't stop her." He pulled out a card and scribbled an address on the back. "She's in Denver for another few weeks before they return east for the winter. If you write to her, mention my name. She'll see you. Why are you helping us?" Rose asked bluntly. "Most people in this town are too afraid of the Coles to get involved." Garrett smiled sadly. "Because I was young once, and I watched injustice happen and did nothing. I watched Sarah Brennan leave town under circumstances that seemed questionable. I heard the rumors about Thomas's death, and I told myself it wasn't my business, that greater men than I had looked into it and found nothing wrong." He met her eyes. "I'm older now, and I've learned that silence in the face of evil is just another form of evil. If I can help right an old wrong, I will." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Eli and Rose standing on the boardwalk with a piece of paper that might connect them to a witness who could change everything. "We need to go to Denver," Rose said. "We do," Eli agreed. "But first, I want to pay a visit to Thaddeus Cole. I want to look him in the eye and tell him I know what he did. I want him to know that his sins are catching up with him. Is that wise?" "Probably not, but I need to do it anyway. For Sarah, and for the 20 years she lost," Rose nodded slowly. "Then I'm coming with you." "Rose, I'm coming with you," she repeated, her voice firm. "He destroyed my family. I deserve to face him too." Eli looked at his daughter and saw the same determination he felt burning in his own chest. They were both chasing ghosts, his of the woman he'd loved and lost, hers of the mother who'd sacrificed everything. And together, they were going to make sure those ghosts finally found peace. The coal ranch sat at the base of the mountains, sprawling across valley floor that should have been Brennan land. The main house was a testament to wealth built on other people's losses. 2 stories of imported timber and glass windows that reflected the morning sun like accusations. Corrals stretched in every direction, filled with prime cattle bearing Cole's brand. Everything about the place spoke of power and permanence. Eli and Rose rode up the long drive on a grey morning, with Sheriff Wade Morrison accompanying them at Eli's insistence. "You go out there alone," Wade had said, "and nobody might ever see you again. At least with me along, there's a witness." A hired hand met them at the gate, a young cowboy with nervous eyes. "State your business." "We're here to see Thaddeus Cole," Eli said. "Tell him Eli Hart wants to talk about the Brennan land." The cowboy's eyes widened. He disappeared into the house and returned minutes later with an older man, grey-haired, hard-faced, with the look of someone who'd done violence and slept well after. This would be Jack Sutton, Cole's foreman. The man Charlie Brewster had seen riding toward the Brennan place the night before Thomas died. "Mr. Cole don't see visitors without an appointment," Sutton said, his hand resting on his gun belt. "He'll see us," Sheriff Morrison said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is official business regarding a property dispute." Sutton's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. "Wait in the parlor. I'll ask." The parlor was expensively furnished with furniture hauled from back east, velvet chairs, Persian rugs, oil paintings on the walls. Rose stood rigid in the center of the room, refusing to sit, her hand near her mother's revolver. Eli stood beside her, reading the room with a scout's eye. 2 exits, heavy curtains that could hide someone, a gun case in the corner with the glass unlocked. This wasn't a safe place. They waited 20 minutes before Thaddeus Cole appeared, and Eli was shocked at what he saw. The man he remembered, robust, commanding, intimidating, had been reduced to a skeleton held together by stubborn will. Cole was wheeled into the room by a servant, wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the day. His face was grey, his eyes sunken, but those eyes still held cunning and cruelty. Behind him came a younger man, 40s, well-dressed, with Cole's features but none of the illness. This would be Marcus Cole, the son who'd inherited his father's empire and by all accounts had none of his father's restraint. "Eli Hart," Thaddeus said, his voice a rasp. "Never thought I'd see you again. Heard you went native up in the mountains." "I came back," Eli said flatly, "for answers." "And you brought Sarah Brennan's bastard with you." Cole's eyes fixed on Rose. "You do look like her. Same self-righteous fire in your eyes? Your mother had that too, right before she ran like a coward." Rose's hand moved toward her gun, but Eli caught her wrist. "Easy. Why did you do it?" Eli asked Cole. "Thomas Brennan never did anything to you. He just wanted to keep his land." "His land." Cole laughed, which turned into a coughing fit that left him gasping. When he recovered, he waved away the servant trying to help him. "It was never his land. Not really. I built this territory. I brought civilization to a wilderness. Men like Brennan were obstacles to progress." "You murdered him," Rose said, her voice shaking with rage. "You had him killed so you could steal his property." "Prove it," Marcus interjected smoothly. "That's a serious accusation, miss. One that could get you sued for slander, or worse." "We have evidence," Sheriff Morrison said. "Witness testimony placing your father at the Brennan Ranch the night before Thomas died. Proof that the loan documents were forged, and letters from Sarah detailing the threats she received." Something flickered in Thaddeus's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. He studied them for a long moment, then smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You want the truth?" he said. "Fine, I'll give you truth. Yes, I wanted the Brennan land. It was prime grazing, and Thomas was too stubborn to sell. So I made him sell." "You forced him," Eli said. "I persuaded him. The loan documents were, let's say, creative. Thomas's signature may have been applied without his knowledge. And when he discovered this and threatened to go to the law, well, accidents happen." Cole's smile widened. "Especially to men who don't watch where they're working." Rose lunged forward, but Eli held her back. "You're confessing to murder. I'm a dying man," Cole said. "What are you going to do, hang me?" "I'll be dead in months anyway. Cancer's eating me from the inside, and I'm glad for it. Means I don't have to watch this territory go soft with men who think justice matters more than power." "And my mother?" Rose demanded. "Why did you threaten her?" "Why force her to leave? Sarah was there the night I visited Thomas. She heard us arguing. She heard me tell him that accidents could happen to stubborn men, and to their families." Cole's eyes glittered. "She was a witness, and I couldn't have her testifying. So I explained to her very clearly what would happen if she spoke. I told her Eli Hart would have an accident, a fatal one. I told her the baby she was carrying, oh yes, I knew about that, would never draw breath if she opened her mouth." Eli felt the world tilt. All these years, and Sarah had carried this knowledge alone, had lived in terror for him, for their child, while he'd believed she'd simply left him. "So she ran," Cole continued. Smart girl. I had men follow her for a while, make sure she kept running. Make sure she never felt safe enough to come back and cause trouble. You're a monster, Rose whispered. I'm a businessman, Cole corrected. And business requires difficult decisions. Sarah understood that in the end. She chose survival over justice. Can't fault her for that. But there's more, isn't there? Marcus said suddenly, looking at his father with something like amusement. Tell them the rest, father. Since you're confessing everything, Cole's expression soured. Marcus? No, they should know. It's delicious, really. Marcus turned to Eli and Rose. Sarah didn't just run away. Before she left, my father gave her a choice. Leave quietly, or he'd frame her for her father's murder. Make it look like she'd killed Thomas for the land, then gotten scared and run. That's insane, Sheriff Morrison said. No one would believe that, wouldn't they? Marcus smiled. Young woman emotionally unstable after her father's death. Pregnant, out of wedlock, facing poverty. People believe what they're told to believe, especially when the story comes from respected men with money. But that wasn't the interesting part, Marcus continued. The interesting part is that father made Sarah an offer. Marry him, give him legal claim to the Brennan land through marriage, and he'd let Eli Hart live. Refuse, and Hart would be dead before sunrise. The room went deathly silent. Eli stared at Thaddeus Cole, horror and rage warring in his chest. She agreed, Cole said quietly. We were married in a private ceremony. She wore black. Appropriate, since it was a funeral for her old life. His smile was cruel. The marriage was never consummated. She fled that same night, took a horse from my stable and disappeared. I didn't pursue her, I had what I wanted. A marriage certificate giving me legal claim to the Brennan property through my wife's inheritance. Rose was shaking, her face pale. My mother, she was married to you. Legally, yes. For about 6 hours. Cole coughed again. I kept the certificate safe all these years. Very useful document, that. Means that when I die, everything I own, including the Brennan land, goes to my heir, Marcus. Unless, Marcus said smoothly, someone could prove the marriage was obtained under duress, or that Sarah had other heirs who might contest the will. Say, a daughter who could claim that the Brennan land should rightfully be hers through her mother's lineage. Understanding dawned on Eli's face. That's why you're telling us this. You want to make a deal? Smart man, Marcus said. Father's dying. When he goes, his estate goes into probate. You could tie up the Brennan land in court for years with competing claims. Or, he pulled a document from his jacket. You could sign this, a legal release of all claims to the Brennan property. In exchange, I'll pay you $50,000. Enough to start over anywhere you like. Blood money, Rose spat. Call it what you want. It's a generous offer. Marcus set the paper on a side table. You have 3 days to decide. After that, the offer's withdrawn, and we handle this less civilly. Is that a threat? Sheriff Morrison asked. It's a business proposition, Marcus said. But yes, also a threat. My father had limits, principles even, however twisted. I have neither. If you force me to fight for what's mine, I'll fight dirty. And I'll win, Thaddeus Cole spoke up again, his voice weaker now. Take the money, girl. It's more than your mother ever saw in her whole miserable life. Take it and go. Leave the past buried where it belongs. Rose walked to the old man's wheelchair and leaned down until her face was inches from his. When she spoke, her voice was cold as mountain snow. My mother lived 20 years in fear because of you. She died in poverty alone except for me, never feeling safe, never coming home. You took everything from her, her family, her home, her future with the man she loved. Rose straightened. I'm not taking your blood money. I'm taking back what you stole. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. She turned and walked toward the door. Eli and Sheriff Morrison followed, leaving Marcus and Thaddeus in the parlor. As they reached the door, Eli heard Thaddeus laugh, a sound like wind through dead trees. She's her mother's daughter, all right, the old man called. Just as stubborn, just as stupid. Sarah chose pride over sense, too. Look where it got her. Eli paused at the door and looked back. It got her a daughter brave enough to stand up to men like you. I'd say that's a better legacy than anything you're leaving behind. They rode away from the Cole ranch in silence, each processing what they'd learned. The marriage certificate changed everything. It made the legal situation more complex, the battle ahead harder. But it also proved something important. Sarah had loved Eli enough to sacrifice everything, even her own name, to keep him safe. "We can still win this," Sheriff Morrison said, as Clearwater came into view. The marriage was under duress. "Any judge would see that, maybe," Eli said. "But Marcus was right about one thing. It'll be a long fight, and he'll fight dirty." Rose spoke for the first time since leaving the ranch. "Let him fight." "I'm not afraid," but Eli was afraid. Afraid of losing the daughter he'd just found. Afraid of what Marcus might do if they continued pushing. Afraid that Sarah's sacrifice would be for nothing if Rose ended up dead in some convenient accident. They had 3 days to decide. 3 days to choose between money and justice, between safety and honor, between walking away and fighting for what was right. Eli knew which choice Sarah would have wanted them to make. The question was whether he was willing to risk Rose's life to honor it. That evening, Eli sat alone in his room at the boarding house, staring at the document Marcus Cole had given them. $50,000, more money than he'd see in 3 lifetimes of trapping and hunting. Money that could take Rose far from Montana, set her up with a new life where the Cole family's shadow couldn't reach her. But it would mean giving up the Brennan land, admitting that men like Thaddeus Cole could murder and steal and face no consequences, letting Sarah's sacrifice be reduced to a business transaction. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Rose entered without waiting for permission, her face set with determination. "You're thinking about taking the money," she said. "I'm thinking about keeping you alive," Eli corrected. Marcus meant every word of that threat. "I know he did." Rose sat in the chair across from him. "And I don't care. I'm not running. Not like my mother had to. Not like you want me to. Your mother ran to protect you. To protect me. That wasn't cowardice. That was love." "I know that. But I'm not my mother. And this isn't 20 years ago. We have evidence now, witnesses, a fighting chance at justice." Rose leaned forward. "You taught cavalry scouts, right? You taught men how to fight when the odds were against them. So teach me. Help me fight this, instead of trying to protect me from it." Eli studied his daughter, 19 years old, fierce as a wildfire, and too brave for her own good. He saw Sarah in her, but he also saw himself. The stubbornness, the refusal to back down, the bone-deep need to stand up for what was right even when it was dangerous. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it smart. We don't just charge in and hope for the best. We build a case so strong that even Marcus's lawyers can't tear it down. We gather every witness, every piece of evidence, every legal argument we can find. And we prepare for Marcus to come at us with everything he has." Rose's eyes lit up. "You're saying yes?" "I'm saying we fight together." Eli extended his hand across the table. "Partners?" Rose gripped his hand firmly. "Partners." Over the next 2 days, they worked like soldiers preparing for battle. Eli's years as a cavalry scout had taught him the importance of reconnaissance and planning. He applied those lessons now, mapping out their strategy with the same care he'd once used to plan campaigns against hostile forces. Their first step was to secure Rose's safety. Eli moved her from the boarding house to a small cabin on the edge of town, owned by Mrs. Hutchins' nephew. It was defensible, 1 door, 2 windows, clear sightlines in all directions. Eli taught Rose how to fortify it, where to position herself if trouble came, how to create multiple escape routes. "You think Marcus will try something before the 3 days are up?" Rose asked as they worked. "I think Marcus will do whatever serves him best," Eli said, nailing boards across 1 window to narrow the opening. "He gave us 3 days because it makes him look reasonable. But reasonable men don't threaten the way he did. We prepare for the worst." Their second step was gathering evidence. Charlie Brewster's statement was solid, but they needed more. Sheriff Morrison helped them track down other witnesses, people who'd worked for Cole over the years, people who'd seen things they were afraid to report. They found a former ranch hand named Pete Donovan, who'd been present when Thaddeus Cole discussed handling the Brennan problem. Donovan had left Cole's employ years ago and moved to a neighboring territory, but he agreed to come back and give a sworn statement. "I've carried that guilt long enough," he said. "Time someone stood up to that family." They found the traveling preacher who'd performed the forced marriage between Sarah and Thaddeus. Reverend Samuel Cross was old now, nearly blind, but his memory was sharp. "I knew something was wrong," he told them, his hands shaking as he signed his statement. The bride was weeping, and the groom looked like he'd won a business deal, not married a woman. "But Cole paid me $200 and told me to keep my mouth shut. I took the money and convinced myself it wasn't my business. I've regretted it every day since." Each witness they found added weight to their case. Each statement made it harder for Marcus to claim his father's actions had been legal and proper. Their third step was legal strategy. James Garrett proved invaluable here. He'd agreed to represent them, and his experience showed in how he structured their argument. "We're not just claiming fraud," he explained, spreading documents across his desk. "We're proving a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 2 decades. Murder, forgery, coercion, and an illegal marriage obtained through threats. Any one of these would be enough to challenge the land ownership. Together they're overwhelming." He'd already drafted court documents challenging Thaddeus Cole's claim to the Brennan property. The moment Cole died, which could be any day given his condition, those documents would be filed. And they'd sent a letter to Catherine Whitmore in Denver, asking her to testify about what Sarah had told her all those years ago. "Will it be enough?" Rose asked. "In a fair court, yes," Garrett said. "But we need to ensure we get a fair court. Marcus has influence with some judges. We'll need to request a judge from outside the territory, someone with no connection to the Cole family." On the morning of the 3rd day, the deadline Marcus had given them, a message arrived at the cabin where Rose was staying. It was addressed to both her and Eli. Written in elegant script on expensive paper, "Miss Brennan and Mr. Hart, I trust you've had time to consider my generous offer. If you're interested in accepting, meet me at the Clearwater Bank at noon today to finalize the transaction. If you choose not to accept, consider this your final warning. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Marcus Cole." Eli crumpled the note and threw it in the fireplace. Rose watched it burn, her jaw set. "We're not going to the bank," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, we're not." Eli checked his rifle, then his revolver. "But we should expect Marcus to make his move soon. He's given us his deadline. When we don't show up, he'll know we've chosen to fight." "Let him know," Rose said. She was cleaning her mother's revolver with practiced efficiency. Sarah had taught her well. Sheriff Morrison arrived mid-morning with Charlie Brewster and 2 deputies. "Figured you might need backup today," Morrison said. "Marcus has been gathering his men at the ranch. Counted at least 8 hired guns yesterday." 8 against 7, Eli said, counting their group. "Not great odds. Better than 8 against 2, Brewster pointed out. "And we've got Wright on our side." "Wright doesn't stop bullets," one of the deputies muttered. "No," Eli agreed. "But smart tactics do. If Marcus comes, we need to be ready." They spent the morning fortifying the cabin and positioning themselves strategically. Eli placed men at windows with clear fields of fire. He had Rose positioned in the back room with a rifle and instructions to shoot through the gaps in the boarded windows if necessary. It felt like preparing for a siege, which in a way it was. Noon came and went. No sign of Marcus. 1 o'clock. Still nothing. At 2 o'clock, a rider approached, not Marcus, but a young boy from the telegraph office. He handed Eli a telegram with shaking hands, then rode away quickly, as if afraid to be associated with whatever was coming. Eli opened the telegram. It was from Catherine Whitmore in Denver. "Received your letter. Remember Sarah well. She told me everything about Cole's threats and forced marriage. Will testify. Husband agrees despite political concerns. Some things matter more than politics. We leave for Montana tomorrow. Stay safe, Catherine." "We have our witness," Eli said, reading the telegram aloud. Relief and tension mixed in equal measure. "Catherine Whitmore will testify." "That's it then," Garrett said, who joined them an hour before. "With her testimony and everything else we've gathered, we have a case strong enough to win. Marcus must know that by now. He'll have heard we've been collecting witnesses, which means he's desperate," Sheriff Morrison said. Desperate men do stupid things. As if summoned by the words, the sound of horses reached them, many horses moving fast. Eli moved to the window and counted. 10 riders coming up the road toward the cabin, Marcus Cole at their head. More than we thought, Charlie muttered. They brought reinforcements. Everyone to positions, Eli ordered. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd faced worse odds and survived. Don't shoot unless I give the word. Let's see what they want. The riders pulled up 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to talk, but far enough to make clear they weren't coming in peace. Marcus dismounted, and 2 of his men did the same. The others stayed mounted, hands near their weapons. Eli stepped out onto the small porch, Sheriff Morrison and Charlie flanking him. Rose remained inside, her rifle barrel visible through a window gap, a clear message that they were ready. You didn't come to the bank, Marcus called. I assume that means you've declined my offer. We have, Eli confirmed. The Brennan land belongs to Rose, and we're taking it back through the courts. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The courts? How quaint. Did you really think I'd let you tie up my inheritance in legal battles for years? Did you think I'd just accept your challenge and hope for the best? I think you don't have a choice, Sheriff Morrison said. This is going to court, Marcus. And we have enough evidence to prove your father stole that land through murder and fraud. Evidence, Marcus repeated. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. You mean statements from people like Pete Donovan? The drunk who'll say anything for money? He dropped the paper on the ground. Or Reverend Cross, who's so blind he can barely see his own hand. Who'd believe him about a ceremony 20 years ago? We have more than that, Eli said. Do you? Marcus's smile widened. Let me tell you what you have, Hart. You have a dead woman's letters that prove nothing except she ran away. You have a forged loan document, but my lawyers will argue it was Thomas Brennan who forged it, not my father. You have witnesses who'll be discredited or intimidated. And you have a claim to land that was legally acquired through a valid marriage. A marriage obtained through threats and coercion, Rose called from inside the cabin. Any judge will see that. Any judge who wants to keep his position will see what I tell him to see, Marcus said. You think you're the first people to challenge my family? Others have tried. They're all either bought off, scared off, or dead. You're not special. Then why are you here? Eli asked. If you're so confident, why not just let the courts handle it? Marcus's expression darkened. Because I'm tired of being patient. Because my father's dying, and I'm taking over. And the first thing I'm doing is cleaning up loose ends. He gestured to his men. You've got one more chance. Ride out of Montana today. Leave everything behind and never come back. Do that and you live. And if we don't, Sheriff Morrison asked, then what happened to Thomas Brennan will look merciful compared to what happens to you. Marcus remounted his horse. You've got until sundown. After that, all bets are off. The riders turned and galloped away, leaving dust and implied threats hanging in the air. Inside the cabin, the group gathered to assess their situation. Rose was pale but steady, her mother's revolver in her hand. The deputies looked nervous. Charlie Brewster looked grim. Sheriff Morrison looked angry. He's going to come back, one of the deputies said. Tonight, probably. With more men. Let him come, Rose said. We're not leaving. Rose, Eli started. No, her voice was firm. I've spent my whole life hearing about how the Coles destroyed my family. How they murdered my grandfather, terrorized my mother, stole our land. I'm not running from them. I'm not giving them another victory. Your mother ran to keep you alive, Eli reminded her gently. I know, and I'm grateful for that. But she ran because she had no choice, no evidence, no support. We have all those things now. We have witnesses. We have the law on our side. We have people willing to stand with us. Rose looked around the room. Right? The men exchanged glances. Then one by one they nodded. I didn't put on this badge to let men like Marcus Cole get away with murder, Sheriff Morrison said. I'm staying. I've got 20 years of cowardice to make up for, Charlie Brewster added. I'm staying. The deputies were slower to commit, but eventually they agreed. They'd taken an oath to uphold the law, and running now would make that oath meaningless. James Garrett stepped forward. I've already filed preliminary documents with the territorial court. If anything happens to any of us, those documents will be investigated. Marcus knows that. He's betting we'll back down, but if we don't, he'll have to weigh whether killing us is worth the scrutiny it'll bring. He's already decided it is, Eli said quietly. That's why he came with 10 men. That's why he gave us until sundown. He's not bluffing. The room fell silent as the weight of that settled on them. Then we prepare, Rose said finally. We fortify this cabin better than any fort. We create defenses, and when they come, if they come, we make them regret it. Eli looked at his daughter and felt a complex mixture of pride and fear. She had Sarah's courage, but she also had youth's conviction that right would triumph over might. He knew better. He'd seen good men die for righteous causes. He'd seen evil men prosper while decent people suffered, but he also knew that some fights were worth having, regardless of the outcome. All right, he said. We prepare for a siege. Charlie, you and the deputies reinforce the doors and windows. Sheriff, check everyone's ammunition and weapons. Garrett, I want you to write down everything that's happened today. If Marcus does attack, we need a record. He turned to Rose. And you're going to learn everything I know about defensive positions and tactical retreat. Because if this goes bad, I need to know you can survive. We'll both survive, Rose said. You, me, all of us. Eli wanted to believe that. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened and sundown drew closer, he cleaned his rifle and checked his revolver and prepared for the possibility that he might have found his daughter only to lose her in the same fight that had stolen Sarah from him 20 years before. Outside, the sun crept toward the horizon. Inside the cabin, 7 people waited for darkness and whatever it would bring. And in the mountains beyond town, Eli's buckskin mare, Dusty, stood in the livery stable, saddled and ready. Because Eli had learned long ago that hope was good, but escape routes were better. Sunset painted the Montana sky in shades of blood and gold. Eli stood at the cabin window, watching the light fade and shadows lengthen across the empty street. Behind him, Rose checked her mother's revolver one more time, the cylinder clicking softly as she spun it. They're not coming, one of the deputies said, hope evident in his voice. Maybe Marcus was bluffing after all. He's not bluffing, Eli said quietly. He's waiting for full dark. Makes it harder for us to see them coming, easier for them to surround us. Sheriff Morrison joined Eli at the window. How many do you think he'll bring? All of them. 10 men minimum, maybe more. He wants this finished tonight. Eli turned from the window to address the room. Listen to me, all of you. When they come, they'll try to intimidate us first. Demands, threats, maybe a show of force. Don't shoot unless they fire first or unless I give the order. We're lawmen and citizens defending ourselves, not aggressors. That distinction matters if we survive this. And if they do shoot first, Charlie asked, then we make every bullet count. Eli's hand rested on the cavalry medal he dug out of his pack earlier. Tarnished brass on a faded ribbon, earned in a fight 20 years ago when he'd held a position against impossible odds. He'd survived that night. He intended to survive this one. He walked to Rose and held out the medal. This was given to me for valor under fire, for holding a position when retreat would have been easier. I want you to have it. Rose took it, her fingers closing around the metal. Why? Because you're already braver than I was at your age. And because if something happens to me tonight, I want you to have something that's mine. Something that says we were family, even if only for a few days. Nothing's going to happen to you, Rose said fiercely. But she pinned the medal to her vest anyway, right over her heart. The darkness deepened. Stars emerged one by one, cold and distant. The temperature dropped, as it always did in the mountains. Breath starting to fog in the unheated cabin. At 8 o'clock, they came. Eli heard them before he saw them, the jingle of harnesses, the soft thud of hooves on packed earth, the creak of leather. Men moving quietly but not silently, confident in their numbers. He counted shadows as they emerged from the darkness. 12 riders, maybe more. They spread out in a loose semicircle around the cabin, staying just beyond easy rifle range. Marcus Cole sat his horse at the center, visible in the moonlight. "Hart," he called. "Time's up. Last chance to ride out." Eli opened the door halfway, keeping the rest of himself behind the frame. "Can't do that, Marcus. This is where we make our stand." "Then you're all fools." Marcus's voice carried the flat certainty of someone used to getting his way. "You think you can hold a cabin against 12 armed men? You think Sheriff Morrison's badge means anything out here? This is Cole land. Cole law? This is Montana territory," Sheriff Morrison called from inside. "And territorial law says murder's still murder, regardless of whose land it happens on. Is that right?" Marcus gestured, and his men raised their rifles. "Then let me educate you on the difference between law and power. Power is sitting on a horse with 11 armed men at my back. Law is just words on paper. Actually," a new voice called from the darkness, "law is me." A figure emerged from the shadows behind Marcus's men, a tall man in a long coat with a badge glinting on his chest. More men appeared behind him, rifles ready. Eli counted 6, maybe 7. "I'm U.S. Marshal William Foster," the man continued, riding forward until he was beside Marcus. "And you're all under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, intimidation of witnesses, and about a dozen other charges I'll be happy to list once you're all in shackles." Marcus's face went white. "You have no jurisdiction here. Federal crimes, federal jurisdiction." Marshal Foster pulled out a document. "I have warrants for you, your father Thaddeus Cole, Jack Sutton, and several others in your employ. Territorial judge issued them 3 days ago based on evidence provided by James Garrett, Esquire." From inside the cabin, James Garrett spoke up. "Surprise, Marcus? While you were busy making threats, I was making sure the law caught up with you. Catherine Whitmore's testimony wasn't just for a civil case, it was for a criminal one. And federal marshals take murder conspiracies very seriously." Eli felt the tension in his shoulders release slightly. This was why Garrett had insisted on sending that telegram to Denver, not just to secure Catherine's testimony, but to alert the federal authorities to what was happening. He'd been playing a longer game than any of them realized. Marcus's hand moved toward his gun. "You think you can take us all?" "I think," Marshal Foster said calmly, "you need to consider whether dying tonight for land you're about to lose anyway is worth it. Your father confessed to murder. We have written statements from witnesses. We have documentation of fraud. Even if you kill every person in that cabin, you're still going to hang for what the Cole family has done." The night held its breath. 12 guns pointed at 7 lawmen. 7 guns pointed back. And in the cabin, Eli Hart held his rifle steady, prepared to fight if necessary, but hoping desperately that he wouldn't have to. Marcus Cole's hand hovered near his gun, his face contorted with rage and calculation. Around him, his hired men shifted nervously. They'd signed on for intimidation, maybe some rough work. But going up against federal marshals was another matter entirely. "Your men are thinking about the odds," Marshal Foster observed. "They're thinking about how much you're paying them and whether it's worth dying for. They're thinking that even if they win this fight, they'll be hunted men for killing lawmen. And they're thinking maybe they should cut their losses." One of Marcus's men, a grizzled cowboy with gray in his beard, slowly raised his hands and dismounted. "I'm out, Marcus. You didn't say nothing about fighting marshals." "Get back on that horse," Marcus snarled. "No, sir." The man unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall. "I need work, but I don't need a noose." Another man followed suit, then another. Within moments, half of Marcus's force had disarmed themselves and were standing with their hands up. The remainder looked uncertain, caught between fear of Marcus and fear of federal law. Jack Sutton, Cole's foreman, spat tobacco juice and kept his rifle pointed at the cabin. "Boy pays me good money to be loyal. I ain't turning on him." "Loyalty's admirable," Marshal Foster said. "But you were there the night Thomas Brennan died. Charlie Brewster saw you riding to the Brennan place with Thaddeus Cole. That makes you an accessory to murder. Put down the gun, and maybe we can work out a deal where you testify against the Coles instead of hanging with them." Sutton's jaw worked. 20 years of loyalty warring against survival instinct. Finally, slowly, he lowered his rifle. "What kind of deal?" "The kind where you live to see old age, but only if you tell us everything. Who gave the orders, who carried them out, what really happened that night. Sutton looked at Marcus, and whatever he saw there must have decided him. Thaddeus Cole ordered the hit on Thomas Brennan. Said the old man wouldn't sell and wouldn't shut up about the forged loan. Cole hired a man named Pike to cause the logging accident. I was there to make sure it looked right. To make sure no one suspected. You bastard, Marcus hissed. You would have hung me to save yourself, Sutton said flatly. Don't pretend otherwise. Marshal Foster gestured to his men. Cuff them. Sutton, you're under arrest, but you'll be held separately for witness protection. The rest of you who surrendered will sort out your involvement later. Marcus Cole, you have the right to... Marcus's gun came up fast, aimed not at the marshals but at the cabin, at Rose, visible in the window. Time seemed to slow. Eli saw the movement, saw the intent, and moved on pure instinct. His rifle barked once, sharp and decisive. Marcus's shot went wild, his gun hand jerking as Eli's bullet took him in the shoulder. The night exploded into chaos. The remaining Cole men who hadn't surrendered opened fire. The marshals returned it. Inside the cabin, Rose dropped below the window line as bullets punched through the walls. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies fired through the gaps, their muzzle flashes lighting the dark interior. Eli worked his rifle with practiced efficiency, sight, breathe, squeeze, cycle. Each shot deliberate, each one aimed to disable rather than kill. This wasn't the kind of fight where you aimed for hearts. This was about survival and justice, not vengeance. The gunfight lasted less than a minute, but it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Cole's men were down, wounded, not dead, which was intentional. The marshals had been aiming low too, going for legs and arms. The rest had thrown down their weapons and surrendered. Marcus Cole lay on the ground, cursing and bleeding from his shoulder. Marshal Foster stood over him unharmed. That was stupid, son. Really stupid. Check the cabin, Eli called, his heart hammering. Is everyone all right? We're good, Sheriff Morrison responded. One deputy took a graze, but nothing serious. Rose? I'm fine. Her voice was shaky but strong. Just got wood splinters in my hair from the wall. Eli sagged against the doorframe, relief washing over him. They'd survived. All of them had survived. Marshal Foster and his men secured the prisoners, binding wounds and fitting shackles. Marcus was hauled to his feet, his face twisted with pain and fury. This isn't over. My father will... Your father is dead, one of the marshals interrupted, emerging from the darkness leading a fresh horse. Got word by rider 20 minutes ago. Thaddeus Cole passed at 7 o'clock tonight. Your inheritance is nothing but legal troubles now. The fight went out of Marcus all at once. He slumped in the marshal's grip, suddenly looking less like a dangerous man and more like someone who'd lost everything. Marshal Foster approached the cabin, and Eli stepped out to meet him. They shook hands in the moonlight, the sound of wounded men groaning and horses stamping the only sounds besides the wind. Thank you, Eli said simply. Thank James Garrett. He contacted us a week ago with his evidence. We've been gathering our case ever since. Foster glanced toward the cabin. Your daughter in there? She is. Then you should tell her she owns the Brennan land now. Free and clear. Soon as the courts sort through Thaddeus Cole's tainted estate, that property reverts to Sarah Brennan's heir. He smiled. Congratulations, Hart. You won. But as Eli looked at the wounded men and the blood on the ground and the hatred in Marcus Cole's eyes, he wasn't sure it felt like victory. It felt like the end of a long, painful road, one that Sarah had walked alone for 20 years before he'd even known to look for her. Still, as Rose emerged from the cabin, her face pale but determined, the cavalry medal still pinned to her vest, Eli felt something shift inside him. Maybe not victory, but justice finally, and a family reclaimed from the ashes of the past. 3 months later, on a morning when spring was just beginning to touch the Montana high country, Eli Hart stood at the gate of the Brennan Ranch, Rose's ranch now, and watched his daughter direct the construction crew working on the new barn. She moved with purpose and confidence, Sarah's determination evident in every gesture. The legal battles had been surprisingly swift once the federal government got involved. Marcus Cole and Jack Sutton were awaiting trial for conspiracy to murder. The forged loan documents had been exposed. Thaddeus Cole's forced marriage to Sarah had been ruled invalid due to coercion, which meant his claim to the Brennan land died with him. The property, all 300 acres of prime grazing land, had been returned to Sarah Brennan's estate, which meant to Rose, Catherine Whitmore had come from Denver to testify, and her presence had sealed the case. She described in vivid detail how Sarah had arrived at her home 20 years ago, pregnant and terrified, and told her everything about the Coles' crimes. "That poor girl lived in fear every day," Catherine had said from the witness stand. "She loved a man named Eli Hart with her whole heart, and she gave up everything to keep him safe. If that's not proof of coercion and duress, I don't know what is." The judge, brought in from another territory to ensure impartiality, had ruled decisively in Rose's favor. The Brennan land was hers. The Cole family's empire was crumbling under federal investigation, and justice, delayed by 20 years, had finally arrived. Now, as Eli watched Rose consult with the carpenter about the barn's roofline, he felt a contentment he hadn't known in decades. He'd moved down from his mountain cabin, at least temporarily. Rose had asked him to help her rebuild the ranch, to teach her what he knew about surviving in this hard country. And Eli had discovered that having a purpose beyond mere survival was a powerful thing. "You going to stand there all morning, or are you going to help?" Rose called, grinning at him. "I'm supervising," Eli called back. "That's important work too." Rose laughed, Sarah's laugh, bright and full of life. Eli had heard it more often in recent weeks, as the weight of fear and grief gradually lifted from his daughter's shoulders. She was young still, with time to heal, time to build the life Sarah had been denied. A rider approached from town, Sheriff Morrison, who'd become a frequent visitor to the ranch. He dismounted and nodded to Eli before joining Rose at the construction site. Eli watched them talk, saw Rose's face light up at something Morrison said. The sheriff was a good man, widowed 5 years, and it was clear he saw in Rose something worth courting. Rose seemed to appreciate his steady, honest nature. Eli turned away, giving them privacy, and walked toward the small plot of land at the edge of the property where 3 headstones stood. He'd had them carved from Montana granite, solid, permanent, proper markers for lives that had mattered. The first stone read, "Thomas Brennan, beloved father, 1810–1865, a man of honor." The second, "Margaret Brennan, beloved mother, 1815–1865, a woman of grace." The third stone was larger, more elaborate. Rose had insisted on that. It read, "Sarah Brennan Hart, 1842–1885, daughter, mother, survivor. She sacrificed everything for love and lived every day with courage. Her legacy lives on in the daughter she raised and the man she never forgot. Forever remembered, forever loved." Eli stood before Sarah's stone, a memorial marker, since her body was buried in the distant town where she died, and felt the familiar ache of loss mixed now with something else. "Gratitude, perhaps, or peace. I found her, Sarah," he said quietly. "Our daughter. Rose, she's everything you'd want her to be, strong, brave, stubborn as hell. She has your eyes and your heart." He touched the cold stone. "I wish you could see her. I wish you could see what she's building here, on the land your parents loved. She's bringing it back to life." The wind sighed through the new grass, and Eli could almost imagine it was Sarah's voice, telling him she knew, that she'd always known Rose would find him eventually. That some things were meant to be, even if they took 20 years to unfold. He heard footsteps behind him, Rose's boots on the new spring grass. She stood beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. "Sheriff Morrison brought news from Denver," Catherine Whitmore wrote. "She wants to visit this summer, bring her husband. She said she'd like to see what became of Sarah's daughter." "That would be good," Eli said. "She was kind to your mother when kindness was rare." She said something else, too. Rose pulled a letter from her pocket. "She said my mother told her once that if she ever had the chance to live her life over, she wouldn't change anything. Not the fear, not the hardship, not the years of running. Because all of it gave her me, and I was worth everything she endured." Eli felt his throat tighten. "Your mother loved you more than life itself." "I know." Rose slipped her arm through his. and she loved you the same way. That's why she gave you up, so you could live. But she never stopped loving you, Dad. Not for a single day. Dad. Rose had started calling him that a few weeks ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Every time she said it, Eli felt 20 years of loneliness crack a little more. I loved her too, he said. I love her still. And I love you, Rose. I'm grateful every day that you came looking for me. I'm grateful you believed me, that you didn't turn me away. They stood together in the spring sunshine, father and daughter reunited by tragedy, but held together by choice. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity, workers building, cattle grazing in the distance. The creek that had once been called Brennan Creek running clear and cold through the property. This was Sarah's legacy. Not the land itself, but what it represented, the refusal to let injustice stand, the courage to fight impossible odds, the power of love to survive even death and separation. She had protected what mattered most by leaving, and now her sacrifice had borne fruit in ways she could never have imagined. Do you think she's at peace now? Rose asked. Eli looked at the 3 stones, imagining the family that should have been, Thomas and Margaret, Sarah and himself. Rose growing up surrounded by love instead of fear. That family had been stolen by Thaddeus Cole's greed. But standing here now, on reclaimed land under a wide Montana sky, Eli thought perhaps a different kind of family had been forged from those losses. Yes, he said finally. I think she's at peace, because she can see what we've done. She can see that her daughter came home, that the land is ours again, that the Coles paid for their crimes. And she can see that you and I found each other, even though she couldn't be here to introduce us. Rose leaned her head against his shoulder, and Eli wrapped his arm around her. In his pocket, he carried the locket still, Sarah's photograph and her letter, worn now from being handled but no less precious. On Rose's vest, pinned where she wore it every day, was the cavalry medal he'd given her. And on the gate they'd raised just last week, carved into new wood, were words Rose had chosen. Brennan land, restored with love. Some secrets destroy families. Some secrets eventually bring them home. As the sun climbed higher and the spring day warmed, Eli Hart stood with his daughter on land, reclaimed from injustice, and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. He felt like he belonged somewhere, to someone. To a family bound not just by blood, but by sacrifice, courage, and the enduring power of love that even death couldn't diminish. Sarah would have been proud, and somewhere Eli believed she was smiling.